From Maine to New Mexico, Arkansas to Oregon, Civic Network Television is lighting up America. CNT, linking America's communities to each other and the future. Live from Washington, D.C., Civic Network Television brings you Mobilizing Community Assets. And now, our moderator, Ramona Edelin.
Let's move on to Module 4, the power of local institutions.
Okay, thank you, Ramona. I think that our discussion in this next part of the community building curriculum will tie directly into our last set of discussions about associations, because we want to begin to contrast, in fact, this sector, the Citizens Association sector, with the local institutions sector. We're walking through this map now toward the outer ring, and I think the way we want to sort of frame this discussion is to say, if we thought about building a house, or if we thought about building a community, one of the things we need to think about is what tools do we have to do it, all right? And our wonderful crew here at CNT has made us a model of a couple of tools, much better than either John or I could do. Here we have a hammer and a saw, right? Now, neither of us is going to pretend to be adept at using either of these tools, but we want to at least make the point that the way we'd like to talk about institutions and to introduce the institutional challenge, if you will, is to say that one kind of a tool does one thing in building a house and another does another. So if we thought about what we've just been talking about, the associational life of the community as this circle of gifted citizens that have come together to do the work of community building, and if we thought about this sort of triangle, sort of more hierarchical, boxes connected in a kind of hierarchical way, as a way of visualizing what an institution is. I think the way we'd like to begin talking about this is to say that systems and institutions are one kind of tool that are very different from the community and associational tool. And we want to explore then this sector, the institutional and systemic sector, its utility, but we want to do it by being very, very upfront and clear about the challenges involved in using this tool, this hammer. We don't want to hit each other over the thumb continuously, right, and bleed. We want to be able to use this hammer, this set of institutions, well. So the first thing we want to do, the first set of challenges we want to explore briefly, is to say, what is the difference between a hammer and a saw, between an institution and a community? And then we're going to take up a second set of challenges. And the second set of challenges has to do with who controls this tool. We're going to be talking about the fact that in communities we've got a whole lot of institutions, schools and parks and libraries and businesses, police. But in lots of communities, our institutions are not connected to the community building agenda. So the question is a question of who controls, who sets the agenda. How do we begin to think about that in terms of the power of local institutions? But first, let's explore this question about the different nature of these two tools. John, do you want to lead us through a little bit of thinking about that?
You know, I think the reason that it's probably useful for us to think about these two different ways of organizing people to do things is because increasingly there's a confusion about them. And sometimes we are using systems or institutions to try to do what communities can only do. And if you tried to use a hammer to do what only a saw could do, you wouldn't succeed very well, right? You can use a hammer to cut a board in half, but it'll be a mess. So the question is, if we could understand what is this way of organizing people, the community way, the associational way, what is that good for? And what is the system way good for, the institutional way? Then we can begin to have a team, to begin to understand how to go ahead in communities. Now, let's see if we can remind you of the difference between these two ways of doing things. First of all, let's think about systems or institutions. When I'm at the university, across the street is a place called the Graduate School of Management, right? And that's a place where they teach people how to make these systems work, right? That's what a manager is, somebody up here who is working one of these ways of doing things. And so when we have talked to people at the Graduate School of Management and we say, what is this way of doing things good at? Why is it organized this way? They've said to us, there are three important things about this way of doing things, the system or institutional way. And the first one, they say, is that this is a way of organizing people for control. It is so that a few people can control a lot of people. Right? So if you want to control people by a few, this is a good way. Now that's not bad, is it? I came here today on an airplane, right? And I want that organized this way. I don't want it organized this way. I don't want the pilot saying, well, folks, where shall we go today, right? And, we're just a community here, right? I want to be appropriately using a system, right? And so when you want to have people controlled, it's a good way. Now, the second thing is, they tell us over at the Graduate School of Management, is the reason, basically, in modern times that we've created this way of doing things is for mass production, in order to produce a lot of the same thing, to produce but lots of the same, right? and think about an automobile company, right? A few people think about how a Chevrolet ought to look, and thousands of people must follow them exactly in order to have a Chevrolet that we can all be sure is always the same, right? So the reason we set things up this way is to be able to take the mind of a few and put it into the hands of many, to set uniformity and standards. But the other thing that then we can realize is that if what we want to have is something that is individualized, that is just appropriate for Sherman and not for everybody, this is the wrong tool. And we have a lot of people in the human services that are burning out because they're being asked to use a system in ways that it won't work. They're trying to be told to individualize everything. Doesn't work. It's not what it's for. The third thing that is characteristic here is that it produces a client, right? In other words, it doesn't do any good to have this whole thing organized if you don't have clients. So the bigger it gets, the more clients you need, or the more consumers you need. So the outcome of using this is to always have a demand for more clients and consumers, not producers and citizens. Now, if we look over at associations and say, well, now, what are they for? What are they good at? Why are they organized as tools? The first thing is they're not about control at all. They're about consent. Right? By that, I mean that if you're in an association, think of the ones that you named, right? Nobody can tell the people in that association what to do. Can't even tell them to come to the meetings, right? so that when I'm in the university in a classroom, I may have a group of people in that room, but I control them. But as soon as I go to a local association, then something else happens. Then I'm one like the others, right? So it's where consent works. But that's what democracy is about, consent. That's why power grows from association, not from systems. Now, the second thing we know is that it can't produce a thing. Associations don't produce stuff. They don't produce services, for instance. But what they do allow and are the center of is care. You see, systems can't produce care. Medicare doesn't care. Can't care. It's a big system, sends checks out. And this is the terrible confusion we have these days, that systems can care. And this is, I think, the explanation for a lot of the problems we call youth problems, is that we have come to the idea that a system can take over the lives of our young people and have programs and curriculums, and somehow those people will grow up as members of community. But what they're getting is a service, and what they're not getting is care. And so it is pretty apparent, I think, that if you want to deal with what are called youth problems or elderly problems or all of the social problems that we're talking about today, it's this tool that is essential if care is where you want to come out. Why are people in the room, in the association that you belong to? Because they care about something. Why are they out cleaning out the highways? Because they care. They're not saying, pay me. They're saying, I care. Right? And third and last, they can't produce clients. They can't produce consumers. They aren't about that. They're about citizens. Right? And so you can see that we have two worlds. One world, which is a world of the power of productive people, and the other is the power of controlled people. And when we talk about community services, I think we're confused. Systems can't produce community or services or care, right? When we use community in relationship to systems, I think we're getting confused. We're talking about a hammer, and what we need is a saw. So the sorting out, I think, at the community level is critical, is for us to understand the difference between these two, and especially to recognize that as this grows larger and larger, it can overwhelm this. That systems can try to replace and push out associations, and when they do, the community will be weak and fully served. And we need communities fully citizened and systems that are servants. So we want to come back then to the question of control, and that is, who does control these systems has a lot to do with whether or not systems are going to be servants or whether they're going to be lords. Jody?
What's interesting, John, about what you've just sort of introduced us to and the nature of these two tools is then to think about all of us. I think in some way or other we are all people who have one foot in each of those two worlds, right? Part of us operates in an institutional or a systemic world, right? We're part of these big things. We fly on them. We work in them, right? We produce in them. But we also have a foot in community. And I think what we're thinking about here is to say now, which foot can do which kind of work? Where should we be leading? What foot should be leading down which path, right? And that's the sort of exploration we're in at this point. And I think there's an awful lot of reinvention that we have to do in terms of our problem-solving capacities that has to do with understanding these two tools. Now, the second dilemma that goes beyond the nature of the two tools and the difference between what they can do well and what they don't do so well is this question about who controls these things. If we're interested in using this hammer, these institutions and systems to build communities, how is it that we can begin to understand the process which would take place if a community were to recapture them? Because I think what we see in a lot of our neighborhoods at this point is that our neighborhoods are filled with these things, with schools, and with parks, and with police, and with service agencies, and with a whole lot of other kinds of institutions, which might as well, for all that they contribute to community building, be on Mars, right?